Good morning, everybody. Hello. My name's Jules. I'm the speaker liaison for iCAAD London. It's my greatest pleasure to introduce Dean Porterfield this morning. Dean is the director of Arch Academy at Cumberland Heights and an approved LPC clinical supervisor. Dean has served as an executive director of an outdoor therapeutic program for adolescent males for over 10 years and has also served on the board of directors of the National Board of Therapeutic Schools and Programs. Dean brings over 18 years of experience working with the adolescent population and their families. Today's presentation is entitled Meaningful Engagement with the Substance Abusing Adolescent Male. It's a very, very important topic, and this presentation will focus on how best to engage adolescent males and young men who suffer from primary substance abuse diagnosis and co-occurring issues within a therapeutic context. And without going too much into it, I'm going to hand over to Dean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so we're going to start with, so this presentation was designed for probably a longer time frame than what I have. So some of this stuff we're just going to go and move through pretty quick. Some of this stuff I'm going to assume you understand. So tell me to slow down when I need to. But at the latter part of the presentation is when I've built in actual techniques. And so far, the people that's approached me, that's what they're interested in. So that's what we'll do. My disclosures, employee of Arch Academy of Cumberland Heights, been with Cumberland Heights for going on 9 years, also owner of Do Life Counseling and Consulting in Nashville, Tennessee. Prior to that, worked in an outdoor therapeutic program for about 10 years, 7 of which I was the executive director. So kind of our goal today, define the population, trends that we see in substance abuse, adolescent male development. So a lot of this is going to be focused on, because a lot of times when you go to presentations and so forth, you're going to see addressing adolescence. So what I'm going to be doing here specifically is separating that out from the female population. We have served both populations, but there's definitely a difference. So I'm going to provide some insight to that and give you some references to kind of look at and go off of. All right, so I'm going to play you a clip. This clip is from the television show Friends. I caught this clip one day when was working with, this was in our outdoor program. It was one of those days where you had this kid, this adolescent, and he was one of those kids that were up and down. This is probably about 15 years ago, 16 years ago. At one point, the whole treatment team was in favor. Yeah, we're going to hold on to this kid. This is going to work. We're going to make this work. And then we got to the point, it's like, how in the world is this going to work? What are we going to do? And it was one of those days where he was up and down, threatened suicide. He presented with, and back in this time frame, the concept of borderline type tendencies wasn't well known, especially in this young a population. But this kid had a couple attempts and so forth, but man, we're going to rally around this kid. Of course, we couldn't keep him if he was actively suicidal, so we had to engage him in different ways. And so this clip came on, or this episode of Friends came on, and as you watch it, I want you to imagine that the couch is the teen, the adolescent, and that the characters are the treatment team. And then see what you can extract from that.
Look, I drew a sketch of how we're going to do it, okay? Rach, that's you. That's the couch.
Ooh, what's that?
Oh, that's me.
Wow. Certainly think a lot of yourself.
Oh, that's my arm.
Oh, I see. I thought you just really, really liked your new couch.
You know, just follow my lead.
Okay.
Come on, Shelley. All right, okay. Here we go. All right, ready? Yeah. Turn. Okay. Turn. Turn.
I don't think we can turn it
think it's gonna fit.
Oh, yeah, well, come on, up. Yes. Here we go. Pivot. 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 Pivot.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Okay, I don't think it's gonna pivot anymore.
You think?
All right, let's bring it back down and try again.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, I think it's really stuck now.
I can't believe that didn't work.
I know, me neither. I mean, you had a sketch.
Oh, you know what? What did you mean when you said pivot?
So think about that. What stands out for that clip? The what? The couch. Yeah. And one of the things I thought about was, it's an apartment building. How many couches go up those stairs? This is doable. And it's also the communication piece. They not understanding what is pivot, and that team just getting so frustrated with each other. We had a plan, the plan didn't work. So it's that sometimes it can get that frustrating in working with this population, and sometimes it takes just stepping back, focusing on the kid, and taking a different perspective. So for me, that helped me at the end of that long day. When what are we going to do with this kid? Come in next day, bring the team back together. Let's take a fresh look at this. So kind of I'm going to give you a reference point to the population I work with, age 14 to 18. Primary substance abuse diagnosis. Typical co-occurring is depression, anxiety, trauma, and grief. One of the things that, and of course this is one of those things that are being trained on all the time, is the concept of trauma. And a lot of people probably underestimate the amount of trauma that a young person has experienced up to that point. But once we get to know these kids, especially if they're in a drug culture, they've experienced a great deal of trauma. So we spend a lot of time these days bringing folks like Judy Crane in and Judith Landau to come in and actually do a global training for all of our staff. So we're heavily focused on this. Common stressors: guardian, parents, conflict, academic pressures, athletics, peer relations, identity, transitions from grade levels, and college prep. Who we're seeing: 71% of our guys have a dual diagnosis, a co-occurring disorder. So when they come into us, substance abuse is what brings them to our door. And then once we kind of get them cleaned up, it's not uncommon for us to see other things surface. But obviously you got to be cautious when you make those diagnostic, especially prior to 18, because adolescence within itself can replicate many mental health disorders. So you got to be careful with that. Here's what we see as common co-occurring: the OCD, ADHD, and depression combination. ADHD, depression, conduct, depression, anxiety. ADHD, if you see the theme of ADHD as I was talking to someone earlier about, anxiety, depression, ADHD, anxiety. Now, I will say, once these folks get into these young men get into our program, it's not uncommon for us to not see the ADHD once we start using different techniques. So sometimes we'll start to see some misdiagnosis. Now, when you come in, we take you off all stimulants. So if you're on any kind of stimulant for ADHD, you're going to go off that. Now, our psychiatrists will look at considering prescribing a non-stimulant if the treatment team recommends it. But first, we just want to get the kid cleaned off every substance and see what they bring to the table. All right, drug of choice is marijuana. That's the ever-present drug. It's not uncommon for that to be co-occurring or a polysubstance with the following: back in the States. I'm called upon to do a lot of television interviews and so forth with the local media, and they want to focus on the opiate epidemic. But we don't see that in this population. So they always have a sound bite. So they're always trying to get you to say something or do something to kind of complement their perspective. Now, also, I served as the director of the Young Men's Program before taking over and planning this new program. But we would see a dramatic increase at probably age 19 to 20 into the opiate sector. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Again, most people are wanting techniques, ideas, concepts. Here's what we're looking at: developmental tasks for adolescents. And one of the things I want to point out is, even in our Young Men's Program, goes age to 25, 26, we are still dealing with adolescents. Also in my private practice, I've got 24, 25-year-olds going on 15, 16, and something that referred to as arrested development. Especially once you see the introduction of drugs, substances, those kind of things, you almost see that kid freeze in that developmental phase. The cool thing is, once they get into treatment and get into regular counseling, proper care, they catch up a lot quicker, as opposed to some of the our adult patients who don't catch up as quick. So obviously, the earlier the intervention, the better. Challenges. The goal of the teen is to challenge authority. It's very different. It takes I always say, it takes a unique breed to work with adolescents. Either you can, or you can't. And I have just as much respect for folks who understand that that's not my group, that's not who I can work with. I also have those groups. I particularly don't like working with older adults, 30s, 40s, those kind of things. So these are the tasks that we're looking for these folks to bring to the table. All right, one of the things that I found very helpful, a few years ago, went to a training at NATSAP. NATSAP is the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs. So we're in the States, we have a national conference, and then we have a ton of regional conferences. And I heard this guy talk. Has anyone ever heard of Michael Girian? His book is Saving Our Sons, and he's got several too. He has a book also on looking at working with the female population. But when I saw this book and he was going over some of these things, it's like, man, that makes sense. That's what I see. You know, a lot of it wasn't like, man, that's new for me. It just helped complement exactly what I had been seeing over the last 20 years. And so I'm going to play this video.
We know a male brain from a female brain, and I'm going to read you a little story that illustrates one of the ways we know. So this is in the minds of boys. These were boys who were looking back, who were somewhere between my age group and the general's age group. I think now they'd be about 65. And they were looking back at when they were kids and what they did. So when we were 13 or so, my friends and I had a game, this guy says. We'd go down to the basement, we could make it completely dark, each of us would find a hiding place. Then someone would start the game by turning out the lights, and we would try to hit each other with darts. Okay? So picture metal-pointed darts. You'd think you heard someone make a noise. And by the way, as I read this, I'm going to beg you to think about, if you're male, something like this that you did, and if you're female, something like this that your brothers or a male friend did. We would try to hit each other with darts. You'd think you heard someone make a noise. You'd come out of your hiding place throwing darts, but then you're cringing because you were fair game too. There'd be silence. Then you'd hear someone yell, "Ow!" So one time we turned on the light, a guy had a dart dangling from his cheek, just below his eye. Did they stop? Really? It was so dangerous, you'd think they'd stop. No. He just goes, no big deal. After that, we just wore goggles. They were done. Think about any culture on Earth, so any ship, any culture on Earth, where you can get 5 girls who really, really like each other, because those 5 boys are best friends. 5 girls who really like each other, who think to themselves, I want to show my love for my friends by taking these girls with me down into a completely dark basement and throwing metal-pointed darts at each other. That feels like a way to show my love to my sisters. And I challenge you, and I don't think any of us are going to find that unless obviously it's an experiment and we stage it. Well, why? And what I'm going to do is the male side of this first, and then I'm going to show you a video clip and switch over to the female. I'll go back and forth between male and female. So on the male side of this, here are a few things that are happening in the brain that set up this behavior. Number 1, these are darts. So one thing is they're objects moving through space. Okay, so store that. Number 2, there's aggression in it and challenge in it. The friendship is shown, the love is shown through aggression and challenge, as opposed to, or different than, direct empathy, right? So there's a different hormone base we're going to talk about between males and females. All 5 senses, females on average test out better than males. So of course, and why? Because females have more of these sensory centers active that are taking in more data and content. And one of the best ways that shows up is in facial cues. Females pick up more facial cues than males. They have more of their brain is set up to pick up facial cues and to be processing what it is. I wonder what the person's feeling. There are women in here who would be picking up facial cues I'm not picking up because it's a male-female brain difference. Sure, there are exceptions. There's someone out there, a guy, who picks up facial cues really, really well. Of course. However, females tend to pick up more on facial cues, and it gives them joy. They're chatting, they're talking, and so therefore more verbal centers. So less centers in the female brain move objects in space. More centers in the female brain do words and word production. This also is set up in utero. So what happens is the female brain develops with word centers on both sides, sensorial centers both sides, emotive centers all through the brain, and so then more connectivity between word centers and sensorial centers and word centers and emotive centers, right? Because females are doing it on both sides, and this is transcultural. I see people from all races here. Yeah, I see Asian, I see Africa-based, I see Caucasian, all cultures. So this culture does not matter on this. This is on X and the Y chromosome. So females are coming in with word centers on both sides, connectivity to sensorials and emotives on both sides. Males, testosterone surges in utero. And by the way, we get each other's hormones. So women have testosterone, obviously. Men have estrogen. But we're talking 10 to 20 times the testosterone surges, and it resets the right side of the male brain. So the right side of the male brain is not doing words. Right side of the female brain, words. Right side of the male brain, not doing words. So what's happening on the right side? It is not empty. The right side of the male brain is doing spatial mechanicals and visual graphics. So the right side of the female brain is doing spatial mechanicals and visual graphics, right? Yes, absolutely. But the testosterone brain, the brain that's reset by testosterone, is only doing spatial mechanicals and visual graphics.
Okay, so interesting, huh? So one of the things that this brought to light is that idea of how can we connect. It also goes, if we go on a little farther, and someone also just approached me about how can I connect with these guys. It's very difficult to engage them. How do I tap into that? And if you look at traditional therapy, if you even look at the way schools are set up, especially in the States, it is not geared towards this male. It is more geared towards female, especially talk therapy. Think about talk therapy, that verbal connection and that going back and forth. And so that makes it even more difficult to connect. And that's why we found, when I said some of that ADD, ADHD, some of those diagnostic things that was presenting, that was brought to us, kind of disappear once you learn how to engage them. Create a classroom that fits them, making sure that there is that kind of kinetic piece to it. I have one of my favorite things is we have these hacky sacks. And so when I'm sitting in session, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it back and forth. I'm going to hope you're... And then I have two things in my hand here. As we have that conversation, the cool thing is when you're doing that, going back and forth, and you're inquiring, and you're starting that therapy session, you get almost double the amount of feedback and content. Because hopefully what that's doing is also helping tap into that other side a little bit more so that some of that verbal piece comes out. And so I always advise, and in my office, and if you work with adolescents, you have all those things on the squishy balls and all of that kind of stuff on the side. And I sometimes I'll have parents come in and tell the kid, put that down and listen, put that down and listen, which is the opposite of what we need to be doing. So that I always want that whenever that kid's playing with, and they all have their favorite thing that in that office, and you'll see better engagement, better able to connect. Some of this stuff, this is based in the States. Suicide kills approximately 30,000 American boys and men per year. Males kill themselves four times the rate of girls. Suicide among males is the second leading cause of death in America. Boys receive 2/3 of the D's and F's in schools, but less than 40% of the A's. Boys are twice as likely as girls to be labeled emotionally disturbed, twice as likely to be diagnosed with a behavioral or learning disorder. 1 in every 42 boys lives somewhere on the autism spectrum. 1 in every 11 Americans, most of them boys, are diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. Research in 2,000 schools show that at least 1/3 of schoolboys diagnosed with ADD, ADHD are misdiagnosed. And that complements exactly what I've seen over the years. Boys are 4 times as likely as girls to be suspended or expelled. And research shows that boys are behind girls in most developmental, behavioral, academic, and social markers in all individualized countries. And also I have handouts, so if people, if you haven't got a handout, let us know. Here's some more. All right, so going to breeze through this. Again, I'm going to try to get to the techniques piece. For every 112th grade girls who offered or sold or were given illegal drugs, 134 of the boys did the same. For every 100 girls diagnosed with a learning disability, 276 boys. Every 100 girls for emotional disturbance, 324 boys are diagnosed. For every 100 girls 6 to 14 have difficulty getting along with others, 183 boys have difficulty getting along with others. For every 100 girls 6 to 14 years old, difficulty doing school homework, 176 boys have difficulty doing regular schoolwork. 100 women enrolled in college versus 78 men enrolled. So one of the things that Guerin talks about is male nurturance. He's got 7 traits. The first trait is male emotional intelligence is often kinesthetic, and it's that visual, that movement, that ability to engage, what I was talking about earlier. And so here's an interesting thing, the 3 times rule. Let's direct and correct the boy each time he is too impulsive, but don't punish until the 3rd time. Giving them the opportunity to learn, and obviously if it's dangerous, that's a different thing. Trait 2, male emotional intelligence does not avoid but seeks out pain and adversity. This is, and then we've got research behind this too. The female chromosome it has more ability to feel the pain, and the male chromosome has less ability. Therefore, that risk-taking behavior. The punching in the arm, the showing of connection through some of that physical activity. Male emotional intelligence nurtures and builds resilience differently in males and female. Example is when boys run past a teammate that's falling, yelling, "Get up, we need you." He gives an example, and I'll probably skip this video in order to get to the latter part. But one of the examples he gives is they're playing street hockey. One of the 12-year-old young men fall skins his knee. This is a co-ed hockey game, so the girl runs over to him, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And then, as opposed to the boy teammate runs by him and says, "Come on, man, get up. We need you. We need you. We need you as part of this team." So the difference is the nurturance and how we nurture those males, and we'll see some of that later on in this. Emotional intelligence seeks out weakness in order to compel healthy adaptation. This is a huge one. While we know it's true that put-downs can be damaging, we also tend to sense that emotional intelligence development needs put-downs, criticisms, coercion to discover weakness and strengths in others and ourselves. Put-downs to us in a form of love. Abuse and bullying is the exception to this. So that's where this would get kicked back when talking about this point is there is a limit, but there's also that piece of figuring out what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and then you also throw in the context of competition, which also comes along with that enhanced testosterone level that these guys are presenting. Male intelligence, focus on words for feelings, verbal or emotional expression, or do not, as much as female emotional intelligence does. And part of my piece, one of the things I do is I use a lot of cognitive approaches. And as opposed to asking my boys, tell me how you feel, I ask them, well, tell me how you think. Because once you put that feeling word up, that's when they close off. That's when you're going to get them to shut down. But if you ask them, give me an idea of how do you think, then they can talk about that. Well, and we can search that. The male approach to friendship and love is often different from the female. Example he gives is when folks have conversations, when two males have a conversation, and an example he gave is when he recently lost his father, and he goes and meets with a male friend of his at a coffee shop, and they have an exchange, and that exchange is pretty much just a quick check-in. So how you doing? You know, it's been tough, but I'm doing well. And then they move on talking football, and that's okay. In that sense of being able to just check in, and it looks different. Not to say there's not a place, and not to say that couldn't go deeper, but it's also looking at it, because sometimes we get frustrated with these kids. This young man's not expressing himself. He's not really feeling his feelings, and he's stuck. And sometimes we got to take a closer look and make sure, is he really stuck? Or is there different ways that he's dealing with his situation? I'm going to skip this one. So one of the things he talks about is that male aggression nurturance. Emotional intelligence systems favor the female verbal brain. Again, a lot of words. When you think about schooling and reading, and it's very verbal. It's very engaged in the verbal context. Presence of the father figure assumes a baseline attachment to mother. Research suggests less pronounced issues of substance abuse, depression, self-harming if there is a male role model in the picture. And I was at a presentation yesterday that also echoed that, and they were focusing on the relationship with the mother, but also contending that if there is not a father involved, trying to seek a father figure or a male figure for this young man. Aggression nurturance, get back into the game, be resilient. We need you back in the game and functioning, get up, you're needed. Focusing on raising self-esteem. So when that young man walks by that guy and says, man, get up, he viewed that as, okay, I know you're not in danger, you're not going to die, you're safe, get up, we need you, and use that as part of building that young man's self-esteem and belonging to a greater cause. Evidence starting to suggest we're raising kids with only half the emotional intelligence, neglecting the male version of emotional intelligence. Don't take things too personally, debilitating. So that's a lot. So that kind of gives you a picture of why are they different? Why when treating the adolescent population and the male population, you have to take different approaches. Not to say there aren't times you can bring the two together, because that's necessary too, because we have to be able to coexist. But at the same time, when we bring these guys in and they're been using substances, self-medicating, whether it's addiction or not, it's hard to sort out. I have seen more and more young men come in, and I can say this kid is an addict. You know, we don't tell them that; they have to come to that understanding themselves. But we are seeing more and more true addicts, and then we do see the kid that with the experimentation, those kind of things. So when we're doing 12-step type work and they come across the word addict, I'll say, can you substitute that for I abuse substances? Well, yeah, I can do that. All right, so you don't have to call yourself an addict. But for those kids who might fit that profile, a few weeks down the road, they come to me and say, you know what, I had this revelation. I am an addict. I fit that. And usually that comes from sitting in a 12-step meeting and hearing someone that matches their story. When I thought about kind of the power of peer intervention and community, and especially in a 12-step community, I thought of, there's a theme song of Cheers. Kind of counterintuitive, it's a bar, right? But if you listen to the sound itself and you think about the teenage goal is to find peers, find a place where they belong, the theme song fits pretty well. And I won't play the whole thing, but...
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? All those nights when you've got no lights, the check is in the mail, and your little angel hung the cat up by its tail, and your third fiancé didn't show. Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You wanna be where everybody knows your name.
So think about that and how that fits, especially in our, not only in our communities, the peer-driven group. That's why a lot, when you see residential programming, it's going to rely heavily on the group therapy. You know, I have a lot of parents say, you know, my kid really needs more individual therapy. They need more individual attention. They need more of that kind of approach. And what we find is the opposite. We need more peer-driven approaches, led by skilled people, not to go awry. So one of our foundations is the 12 steps. And if you look on this left-hand side, we kind of simplify it. We oversimplify it for the teenage male and actually female. First step, I can't. That ability to, step one, admitting they got a problem. God can, let God. And we define it in a variety of ways. Now, one of the things, especially in working with the adolescent population, we know that that part of their developmental challenge is to identify who they're going to be when it comes to that religious perspective or that spiritual perspective. And we let them, as long as they're exploring, we're fine with that. So we don't push them. Let's look within. Let's admit our wrongs. That step 4 is huge when they take that inventory. So we'll see a kid come in and they're flying high. Once they do that step 1, 2, and 3, they're progressing well in the program. And then around day 45 for us, I can almost ask a kid when they're struggling, they come to my door and they say, man, I'm just not feeling this. I said, what day are you on? It's usually 42, 44, 45, 46. It's almost that time, it's like, maybe, I'm not sure I want this. The sobriety thing, I'm not sure I'm buying this. And usually if we can get them over that hump, that's why we promote at least 60, 90 days. And actually in our new program that we're having, we'll go into a 6-month stay. We still have other options, but that's when we start to see that evolving concept and the ability to change. So again, I'm going to run through this. Step one, the powerlessness, the review of drug history. At this time, we make them take pause and let's look at what's happened. Put it in writing. And then there's a lengthy process in which they sit in front of their peers and they're quizzed by their peers about their substance use and their substance history. What has this cost you? What has this cost your family? And it's not done in a shaming way, because at the end of it, we ask them if you were to, and so all of this stuff goes up on a dry erase board, and then they have the opportunity to turn around and look at it. While they're doing this process, someone's writing everything up on the board behind them. Again, this multisensory approach. And then as they turn around, they get a second to sit with that and view that. And it's not uncommon for you see this tough young man who's been pretty resistant to the process have tears streaming down their face and said, that's where I'm at. And then we let them sit with it for a few minutes, and then we said, well, what would you want to fix first? What would you want to address first? And then we erase it. And then we keep erasing and erasing and erasing. And then in part of that, it's like, it's that sense of hope. All right, that's what we're going to do. Let's get started. And so, but at first they have to have that understanding, because if they don't get that understanding, they go through the program thinking, well, I don't have a problem. It's my parents' problem. Everyone's doing it. It's legal. Pot's legal here, pot's legal there. It's everyone else's problem. That second step is searching for that higher power. Start small, and just looking at helping power. And so again, for our adolescent population, we're not necessarily saying, I want you to define this. And we separate it from religion. We separate it from a sense that you have to have this figured out. Just search. I want you searching. I want you to be able to be open to other concepts, other ideas. And I think that little diagram on the right-hand side there is huge. Surrender, hope, faith, honesty, trust, willingness, humility, responsibility, accountability. I can't read that one. Awareness, and yeah, fades out. Going through grad school, one of the things that stood out for me is this quote. It's a Native American quote. Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, involve me and I'll understand. So any approach we use is about, this is tell me and I'll forget. So these lectures don't work. You can sit there and you can have as many lectures as you want. I tell folks you get 1 minute per age. So if you have a 16-year-old, you might have 16 minutes of a conversation that you're going to have that they might retain, and that's might. Show me and I might remember. But if you involve me, then I'll understand. So it's important to me, what that says is we don't give them the answers, we help lead them to the answers. We involve them, we engage them, and we help find ways that we could make that happen. One of the things I always say, this is that shock statement. You want to do, especially in working with teenagers. In private practice, I typically acquire the kids who have failed therapy. I'm the guy. They say, "All right, you go see Dean. This is if it's not going to work there, it's not going to work anywhere else." And that sounds very ego-driven, and it's very painful. It's one of those painful positions to be in when you get these kids who are so pissed off at therapy, so anti-therapy. They know what to say. They know the language, and so one of those things I throw out there is like, I really don't care how you feel. I'm really not concerned with your feelings. And I'm like, and what's it like to hear me say that? It's like, well, what the hell what kind of therapist are you? And then I follow that up with, I care about how you think. I'm concerned. I want to know how you think. And with the premise that thoughts equal feelings. So man, if we can change and we can look at the way you think and start changing the way you think, then we can probably impact the way you feel. And hearing that is very empowering. It's rare. I would say 95% of my folks that I see respond very well to that comment. I had a friend of mine who knows this is kind of my approach. I go speaking across the U.S. on this, and they sent me this clip and it's appropriate for where we're at too. So.
Are you noticing any night sweats?
No.
Hallucinations?
No.
Sleep?
Yes, I sleep. 4, 5 hours a night.
So you wake early.
And I stay up late. I always have.
We just want to keep abreast of it, that's all.
Yes, of course.
Grief is a very natural state.
My husband has been gone for years. Cancer.
Carol says you've decided to let his things go. Probably a good thing.
Yes, it was my idea. To Oxfam. Perfectly good stuff. People can use these things.
Still, it must be a bit disorientating. You're bound to be feeling...
What? What am I bound to be feeling? People don't think anymore. They feel. How are you feeling? Oh, I don't feel comfortable. Oh, I'm so sorry. We, the group, were feeling. Do you know, one of the great problems of our age is that we are governed by people who care more about feelings than they do about thoughts and ideas. Now, thoughts and ideas, that interests me. Ask me what I'm thinking.
What are you thinking, Margaret?
What's your thoughts, for they become words? What's your words, for they become actions? What's your actions, for they become habits? What's your habits, for they become your character? And what's your character, for it becomes your destiny? What we think, we become. My father always said that. And I think I am fine.
So, interesting perspective. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher. So focusing a lot on these thoughts. One of the things I do REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, and I look at the thoughts and I do a drawing. It's like, here's the non-flexible thinking, here's the flexible thinking. And the sense of control, you hear a lot of people say, man, I just want to learn to control my feelings. And so we learn to substitute that. Well, let's soften that. Let's say, what if the goal is to manage your feelings? Let's figure out how we can manage your feelings. That seems doable, because that control is you do or you don't. Let's put some flexibility in there. Let's take what we have and let's see if we can manage it. Worry, most useless approach and thing that we could ever do. Basically, I referenced Dr. Wayne Dyer. I'm a huge fan of Dyer. And his concept of worry is something that we just think about over and over again, like a sentence, like a prison sentence. And then once we're done, we just kind of let it go until it surfaces again. Switch it to concern. So a lot of times I will say, if I'm talking to Bob, you know, and I say it in two different ways. Bob, man, I'm worried about you. I'm really worried about you. And I said, and then I'll go and say, Bob, you know, I have some concerns. And then I ask him, how do you perceive those two differently? Well, worry is like, man, damn. Now I'm carrying the weight. I've got to carry the weight of how you feel, and it's that sense of and think of that as a parent, as a clinician, when you tell the kid, I'm worried about you. So what you've done is you've passed off even more weight to that kid and saying, I'm concerned. Because in their eyes, in our eyes, concern means, all right, we can do something about this. We can address that. Here's my concern. Here's what's going well. Here's what we need to address. Balancing the two. Should, curse word in my world. Even the kids will point it out if I even say it. Should is that concrete. It's language that you find in a contract. You know, it would have been your preference had it went this way. It would have been more ideal had you studied for your test. It's not awful, it's not horrible, it's not terrible. It's that sense of giving some flexibility, because should says either you do or you don't. And then if they don't, they say F it, and I'm going to go all the way to this side. And so it's you know, man, that would have been ideal. Let's move on. Or if something's horrible, awful, switching that to unfortunate. Man, that's really unfortunate. And that's one of those disarming, especially if you have a teenager coming at you. It's like, man, sucks. This program's the worst program ever, and it's like, well, that's unfortunate, you know. And there might be some truth to that. Then how do they respond? You kind of take the wind out of themselves. The cool thing is, I teach the kids how to do that with their parents too, and it's quite empowering. It's like, let's figure out how can we manipulate mom and dad. In turn, let's de-escalate them. I also love transactional analysis. Not going to spend a lot of time on this because I have a couple things and time is ticking away. But with transactional analysis, it's learning and teaching that kid, how do you stay in that adult state? How do you stay in that rational state when mom and dad is coming at you? And also teaching the parent the same way. Well, and then how do you pull a critical parent down into that adult perspective where it's rational, it's perspective taking, and hopefully what I'm doing for them, I said it shouldn't look any different than this interaction that we're having in this session right now. How can we get our relationships to look like this? One of my folks, I went to West Virginia University, Ed Jacobs is from there, he created impact therapy. A lot of times what we do, common mistakes, we reflect too much. Kids don't buy that. It's like, so I hear what you're saying, or that reflection. So you're feeling this. So like, yeah, dude, I just said that. That's what I'm feeling. Listens to too many stories. Rarely interrupts the client. Does not focus the session. Where are we going? Where are we headed with this? Get a contract. Meaning, what are we going to accomplish in these few minutes? A lot of times, especially with kids that want a lot of time with you, if I tell them I have 10 minutes, I get just as much done in that 10 minutes than I do an hour session. Waits too long to focus and funnel the session, does not use theory and use the Hope method of counseling. As a supervisor, one of the things I require my staff to do is what theoretical perspective do you come from? If you say you're eclectic, you better be able to tell me what you're eclectic in, and not use the word eclectic meaning I just kind of do a little bit of everything and really don't know what I do. I want to know where you come from. You can be eclectic, but then you're going to explain to me, you know, what's Adlerian, what's cognitive behavioral, those approaches. Makes counseling boring, rarely uses creative techniques. My office is full of dry erase board. I don't think any therapist should not have a dry erase board. If you can't make it multisensory, if you can't engage them, I've got props everywhere. I think it's huge. Does not pay attention to the client's voice or face, and then point that out. You know, you were saying that, but if you don't mind, what your face was telling me, what your nonverbals was telling me was this. I'm a little confused. Help me understand that. Impact therapy, RCFF, and that's rapport, contract, focus, funnel, close. With his clients, you have limited time to build rapport. If you don't connect really quick, you're gone. Next. They want the next therapist. I need a new therapist. And sometimes people spend too much time building rapport. And not to say we don't need it, but if you can provide, rapport comes from providing relief. And that's not just with adolescents, that's with all populations. If you can get a client in your office, give them some relief before they leave, then they will come back. Techniques, meet the teen where they're at, but not for too long. I think a lot of people, when we see kids not progressing, a lot of that is because the clinician is saying, I just meet them where they're at. Okay, we can meet them there, but we also need to grab their arm and start pulling them appropriately, because they will sit there. They'll dig their heels in. So be careful. Kick your feet up, the power of a footstool. Every office I have has a footstool. It's very difficult to bring an angry teenager in and have them prop up their feet and for that anger to persist. I have my own footstool, so I mirror that same thing. Huge. Balanced feedback. This is what I see you're doing well. Here's what you could do better. Put me in the driver's seat, especially when I'm working. Man, I want to help you out with your parents, but your parents are only going to take my feedback if you're making progress. So if you're making progress, then I can say, hey, he's doing his part. Now it's time for you to do your part. But if you're not making progress, they don't care what I have to say. So if you can help me advocate for you, let's do that. Nature as an intervention, multisensory approach, measure internalization of skills and having them teach another. Here are props I have: dry erase board, remote control, a red phone. I always have that red phone because I'm a fan of Hero's Journey. And that Hero's Journey speaks about call to adventure. And so I bring out that red phone, and I'm always wondering, what's that about? And so halfway through the session, I would say, if that was your call to adventure, to take that risk. If you know anything about Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, what would you pick up the phone? What's that call? Well, I need to do such and such. I need to confront Dad. I need to do this or that. They always know what's on the other end of that phone. So I'm at 10 minutes. One of the things I want to get to is the power of moments. How do we create moments? So I read this book, The Power of Moments. It was really meant for businesses. And I love taking other kind of books and stuff and applying them to therapy. But it talks about how do we elevate moments, how do we take pride or make pride, insight, and connection. How do we create moments? Because those moments are what's going to generate change. And I've got a video of a young man, went through our program, staff, became staff. Now he's got 6 years sober. And here's his story, and I just want you to play out how we shook his world up, took him out of the program as part of his extended care, and what that did for him.
When I was at Cumberland Heights and I found out that I was staying another 30 days, my therapist at the time decided to pull me out of the treatment center for a couple hours and take me on a hike. And I remember we pulled up to this hike, and to be honest, it kind of looked just like any other typical park, and I really wasn't too excited to walk this hike. It was in August, it was very hot, and I was just in a really just poor mood. But we went on this hike, and we're going through this trail, and you know, before you notice, it's starting to become into the woods, so no longer is it a field, we're just walking in the woods, and we're just carrying on, and we go up this hill, and when we reach the top of the hill, we see this lake, and we go down and sit on a rock and look at this lake, and my therapist asked me, hey Max, you know, like, what do you see? And I'm thinking like, well dude, you know, I see a lake and I see trees, I see a cliff. I thought it was like a trick question. And he told me to look a little bit harder, and I was so closed off at the time that I didn't even look harder, I just sat there. And my therapist told me, he said, Max, this is what I see. And he pointed at the cliff, and on top of this cliff were huge trees, and there were tons of them, fully grown, healthy trees. And sticking out of this cliff was just one tree, and it was barely growing, and you know, it was growing in a very awkward spot, just sticking out of this cliff. And my therapist said, "You're that tree." And I started to look at it, and I was like, okay, like, how am I that tree? And he said, you know, those big trees on top of this cliff, you know, are healthy, they're full grown, they have all this potential. But you have potential too. And you know, he just told me that even though my path is different, the way that my tree is growing is different, I can still have just as much potential, you know, reach all these goals and aspirations that I want to reach. And that my journey is different than all these other teenagers that I'm surrounded by, but you know, I can still reach that same result. And you know, for the first time in a long time, it provides some hope for me.
So that was that ability to create that moment. If you get the opportunity to get that book, and it meant so much. You never know what the catalyst of change is going to be for these guys. If you saw his arm, those were trees. He actually got tattoos put on his arm for trees or trees, because for him that was kind of that pivotal moment. Now, I didn't design that to be a pivotal moment, because we also had one of our female clients go with us, and she was miserable the whole time, and the only thing she took away from that moment was, I never want to be out in the July heat in Nashville, Tennessee. So, but again, it's that multisensory approach. And I'm going to skip over everything. I think we're going to wrap up. Questions, thoughts? Do think about the hero's journey. It's one of those things, especially when working with males, that they can wrap their head around. And I'm not going to play that video, but it's that call to adventure, the threshold, and then slaying dragons. What are your dragons? Who's your mentor? Who's going to help you through that? Let's trace this. And how many journeys do we have going? And that sense of the trials, the prize, and the return. And so when we think about that return, we think about that return back home, that return back to their real life. Because treatment, when you come, it's an artificial environment. We know that. In our program, we do what we can to provide real life experiences. We get them out to meetings. We get them out to just do service work, those kind of things. But still preparing them for what it's like to, you've had this amazing experience, now what are you going to take back home? Also, the idea of what nature does. I'm a huge fan of nature. Shinrin Yaku. Amazing research on the power of just having the kids out in the woods. And someone was just speaking to me about taking treks and those kind of things. That we won't do. That's for laughs. Anyway, so I'm going to end there. Questions? This is a presentation that usually takes me a little longer to do, but kind of downsized it. Do what?
That's a shame not to see all the videos.
Yeah, it is. It's a shame. An hour is a little short. We do genograms, map it out. Huge impact for these kids to see. One of the things that we do.
An intervention. It's sort of hard to describe, but really, it's a coming together. It's a surprise party for people who have addictions. And you get in their face and you scream at them and you make them feel really badly about themselves. And then they stop.
So when I speak in schools, we do this thing where I go into schools and speak. And one of the things we found is we don't preach. And I start with that clip. And if over in the States, in our generation with Netflix, Office is the they binge it, they know it, they're buying merchandise. Of course, this was on back in the day, of course originated here. And so that opens those kids. And then I also take alumni with me so they can hear. And we present facts. Well, you saw a picture of the Nancy Reagan thing, where back in the day, just say no. We knew that campaign didn't work. So we approach, hey, you have a decision to make. And we would just want to educate you. And that's my timer. So any questions? I think it says 2 minutes.
Oh my God.
Just to say, you've got a slide here about tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
All the young men bar one smoke.
Yeah.
And personally, I hate it, but
yeah.
Any comments?
Yeah, and we've seen a drastic decline in smoking in teens until the Juuls came about and electronic cigarettes. And I would say in the last 6 months, especially over in the States, it has become, I will put the word, I hate using the word epidemic, it's an epidemic.
What is?
The Juuls, the electronic cigarettes, the vapes, they're smoking, one pod has the equivalent of one pack of cigarettes. Had a young man come to me the other day, and parents were just, we don't know what's going on with him. High-performing student, but caught him sleeping with his vape pen. And that made no sense to them. And then once I realized that he was smoking up to 3 of those cartridges, I said, well, he needs it. He needs it, or he's laying in bed, he's hurting, because it's like smoking 3 packs a day. He can't go through the night without taking a hit off that. And so we're spending a lot of time, and our government is looking at getting rid of it. Of course, that process will take forever, but it's a huge thing. And unfortunately, a lot of parents say, well, that's better than smoking. And some of that so we got to dispel that. And so yeah, it's become a huge thing. We are now getting referrals for kids who vape, which is new for us. And so we're trying to wrap our head around how we're going to address that and what we're going to do with that. Yeah. Any other questions? Thoughts, comments?
Tell us about, I'm a GP, I'm also a part of the addiction services.
Yeah.
I see a lot of young males coming to us, 17 to 21, that's
Yeah.
sort of age group.
Yeah.
Depression,
Yeah.
history of sick, weed use, but obviously then graduating towards cocaine,
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yeah.
Many are asking for antidepressants.
Yeah.
And obviously we want to get them seen by a psychiatrist first
Yeah.
because the brain is still developing. Can you tell us a bit more about that, the prescription of antidepressants and the age, what is that age? Now there's
Yeah.
some sort of thought around that
Yeah.
when they're 25, that's when you want to really be starting an antidepressant.
Yeah, yeah.
Once people start thinking about it, the brain's still developing.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where
Yeah.
are your beliefs in this?
Yeah. So my disclosure is I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't make medical claims. But we try to wean them off because typically we want to clean them up. We want to see what we have. Once we remove because some of them are taking their antidepressants, but also they're doing pot and everything else with it. Let's just see what we got. Let's see what we got. Now, there are kids who are actively and remain suicidal and that kind of thing. And so our doctor, we don't alter a ton because we don't have a ton of time with them, but we will alter some. The other thing is, and the research is showing this, not only when these kids come to us in residential treatment, not only are we doing chemical detox, we're doing digital detox. The phone, and there's there's a book out there called iGen, the I generation, and tons of research on the fact that we've seen a drastic decline in happiness among teenagers and satisfaction since 2012. And in 2012, what correlates with that is we've got the smartphone. They're becoming less happy, less connected, more suicidal. So now you start seeing programs popping up just addressing that. I know there's one in the States called Restart, and I actually had to put one of my private practice clients in that program to address gaming and the digital piece of what's going on. So that's also come to the table. And but what I found though is and I'm going to echo a panel I was on recently is if these boys and these young people have someone in their lives that will listen to them and hear. A lot of my private practice clients, I'm like, okay, you're better. You don't need to keep coming back, but they keep coming back because they want someone to hear them. And so then that's where, especially when we look at addictions, that's where that 12-step piece is huge. Getting them involved with a sponsor. I wish everyone, whether you're addicted or not, has a sponsor. Someone that cares, someone that listens, someone that's going to be direct with you. That's what this generation needs, and they respond to it too. I've got 3 or 4 texts since I've been over here about just seeking guidance, and these kids will stay in touch. I've got kids that's been in touch with me since I ran my outdoor program for 15, 20 years. One sent me their wedding video or their engagement video last week. And it amazes me what makes these young people pause and reach out to someone that they were in their treatment program 10, 15 years later. So it's important work that, and I applaud anyone who takes this on. So.
Yeah, but my son is 19 on the cusp of, I think, maybe cocaine. He's with weed. He's really successful actually.
Yeah.
I always feel that there's hope because he's still engaging with us.
Yeah.
So where is it when it falls off? Can I tell when he's going to fall off a cliff?
Yeah.
Is it because he's being listened to at the moment and we've changed our tactics slightly by being less shaming? Yeah. How do we keep engaging with our young boys?
I think you engage and there's and at the same time set boundaries and what you're going to tolerate, what you're not going to tolerate. The most difficult I found person to treat is that person who is using weed, cocaine, other substances, and they're still performing well. Those are the ones that feel like that they probably don't have a problem. they don't have a problem, but we know they do, and I see a lot of those more so in private practice, and we have to start digging and uncovering some of those things. So it's still a problem, still deserves treatment. So. Yeah.
Dad's in recovery, been in recovery since he was about 17. So
Yeah.
this is clearly difficult. But they're having real difficulty settings.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of like the kid just walks all over.
Yeah.
But they're still a kid, they're 16.
Yeah.
So I suppose the dilemma I'm asking is what kind of boundaries can they set?
Yeah.
Someone
Yeah.
that's that young is still running around all over.
Yeah. I think, and it is difficult. I think the boundaries that get set are, first off, is if you say something, follow through. That's the consistency piece. I think that's where exactly, and I think that's where everyone falls off track, is they stop following through with that, or it becomes too much of a hassle. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.